Yeah, Paul says in his epistle, I make up in my own body what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the good of his body, the church. Now, it doesn't, of course, mean that Jesus' redemptive act on the cross wasn't enough to save us. We know that the smallest drop of our Lord's blood is enough to save the entire world, past, present, and future. And yet, our Lord, in His mercy and in His divine plan, has given us the ability to share in the redemptive power of the cross by offering our pains and sufferings, which are inevitable in this life, in union with His cross. And we, in a certain sense, become co-redeemers with Christ by offering our suffering in union with Jesus to the Father for the salvation of souls. And so when suffering comes, we can either complain and carp and become bitter about it, or we can join it to the cross of our Lord and be a part of the solution for suffering. All suffering is a share in the Lord's cross. And our Lord told us this. He said, if you would be my disciple, you must deny yourself, take up your cross every day, and follow me. So plainly, the cross is going to be part of our life. And so my cross is His cross, and His cross is also my cross. So it's something He shares with us as members of His mystical body, the church. And it's the only thing, in my view, that makes sense out of suffering. One of the difficulties that people have with suffering is they always want to explain it or escape it. Well, first of all, you are not going to escape suffering. We live in a fallen world. We have a fallen nature. And, and we also live in a world where there are natural laws in effect, things like the law of gravity. And so therefore, if you have a natural law like gravity, guess what? If you fall off the barn, you're going to break your neck. Well, that's a natural law. But we also live in a fallen world. We have a fallen nature because of original sin. And then, of course, you have natural evil and physical evil and moral evil, all these things. So that naturally, it shows us that there will be suffering. But what do we do with it? Well, we make sense of our suffering by joining it to the suffering of Jesus on the cross, you see. So Jesus, when He hung on the cross and died for us, that was not just a mere man hanging on the cross, but God Himself. And so God has entered into our experience of suffering and death, and He shares it with us. And we are also able to give our suffering and our own death to Him as well as a redemptive act. So all suffering can be offered to God in reparation for sin, and it doesn't take anything away from Jesus. It's all really one thing, but it gives meaning to suffering. You see, our Lord's death on the cross gives meaning to our suffering. And there's this is one of the most powerful teachings of our Catholic faith, too, the idea of redemptive suffering, which I'd never heard. I had always been told, well, if you suffer, it's because there's some unconfessed sin in your life, or it makes God sort of sound like He's an angry schoolmaster sitting up in heaven waiting to whack us with a ruler every time we step out of line. And I thought, well, no, it seems to me that God, as He is put forth in the Gospels, is a God of mercy and a God of love, a loving Father. And that suffering, which is unavoidable in a fallen world, only makes sense in the light of the cross of our Lord. And so our suffering is our share in His cross, you see.
Does our suffering help us to be purified so that we may enter into heaven?
It does. It does. The whole idea of penance, things like fasting, these are sufferings that we take upon ourselves as a way to purify the soul, of selfishness, of a lack of Well, we get worldly, don't we? We, we act as if we're going to be here forever, as if the things of this life are going to ultimately satisfy us. And so we have to realize that even going to Cracker Barrel is not going to feed the soul ultimately. And so we have to, we take upon ourselves voluntary penances as a way of reminding ourselves that the goods of this world are not what we're created for. We're created for more than that. And when we have involuntary sufferings, we can join those as well to the cross of our Lord. So suffering does purify the soul. I mean, you've heard that your whole life. Suffering is good for the soul. I've always heard that. When you're young, you maybe don't believe it as much. You don't see the good in suffering. But I think as you get older, you see the good in it and the necessity of having the soul purified and maybe the rough edges sanded off a little bit, you know. Certainly, suffering is part of the imitation of Christ himself. The goal of the Christian life is to imitate Christ. And our Lord certainly suffered quite a bit. And not just in his passion. We could traipse through the Gospels and show at moments where he was rejected by his own people. He was hungry. He was thirsty. He was walking from one place to another and probably was very tired. He was betrayed by friends. He knows the reality of human suffering, and our embracing of suffering is nothing but an imitation of him, you see.
I've heard some people say that if somebody's dying and you just want to make them comfortable, but maybe we're robbing them of the purification that's needed prior to death.
Yeah, the tendency nowadays is to just sort of give people pain medication and knock them out. But a person, you are in a certain sense robbing the person of the ability to be able to embrace their suffering in a meaningful way, and also of the ability to sort of to pray and to be aware of the fact that their earthly life is coming to an end, especially if you avoid talking about it with them. I've oftentimes been surprised when I've been called to the house of a dying person. No one has talked about it. They all know they've called me because the person is dying, and yet no one has breached the subject. And I will, of course, arrive at the bedside and I will immediately ask the person, are you ready to die? You're dying. Are you ready? And I have never had an instance where there wasn't a relief in the person who was dying, that someone finally mentioned it, that someone recognized that their earthly life was coming to an end and was willing to hear what they had to say about it, how they felt about it, and to pray with them at that moment, and to maybe help them come to grips with it. Because it's not going to go away just because you ignore it. And yet we are hesitant sometimes to talk about the reality of death.